Silas Scratch went to live in the forest, where he survived by eating slugs and berries. Then Melinda Henson said she heard he went crazy and grew his fingernails really long. See, I could have done without the part about the long fingernails, because that sort of thing really gives me the willies. One of our chaperones, Mr. Healy, said that when his class went to Hardscrabble Farms, a kid named Frankie came across Silas Scratch's shack in the woods, and after Frankie saw it, he was never the same. Anyone who hadn't heard of Silas Scratch before knew about him now, because the story spread like wildfire. I found the whole Silas Scratch thing disturbing. I guarantee you, if anyone told me there was a deranged farmer prowling the grounds of Hardscrabble Farms, I would have just stayed home and taken my chances with Dad. After we were done unloading the bus, we brought our stuff down to the main lodge, which was a giant log cabin with a bunch of long tables inside. The person in charge was Mrs. Graziano, and once everyone sat down, she gave a speech about the camp rules. There were a bunch of them, but the one she said was most important was that boys and girls aren't allowed to visit each other's cabins for any reason. Mrs. Graziano said this was her 19th year coming to Hardscrabble Farms, and she wasn't going to put up with any nonsense from anybody. Then she had the chaperones go through everyone's bags to make sure nobody was trying to sneak in any junk food or electronics. A few kids got busted with stuff in their bags. Mike Barrows had a pound of Swedish fish in his backpack, and Duane Higgins got caught trying to smuggle in a giant chocolate chip cookie. I was really glad I'd left those candy bars back home, but I was a little worried the chaperones might confiscate my baby wipes. Once Mr. Jones caught a whiff of my bag, though, he didn't go digging any further. After that, we had lunch, which was hot dogs, baked beans, and stuffed peppers. There weren't any other choices, so if you didn't like any of those things, you were out of luck. When lunch was over, the chaperones told us to scrape our leftovers into a giant pot. I hadn't touched my stuffed pepper, so I dumped the whole thing. I asked Mr. Healy why we put our leftovers into a pot instead of the trash can. He said at Hardscrabble Farms, no food goes to waste, and everything we didn't eat for this meal is put into a stew for the next one. He said it was the same when he came to this camp as a kid, and they still use the exact same pot. That means there could be leftovers from 30 years ago in that thing. After lunch, Mrs. Graziano and the female chaperones took the girls to the other side of camp to go to their cabins. Mom had actually wanted to volunteer as a chaperone last minute, but she wasn't comfortable leaving Manny with Roderick and Grandpa. That kind of stinks, though, because she could have fed me inside information from the girls' side of camp. Stuff like, "You don't stand a chance with Lauren, but Chloe thinks you have a cute butt." Us guys stayed back in the cafeteria to get our cabin assignments. Most of the groups were kids who hang out together at school, but each cabin seemed to have one kid who didn't belong. The school must have decided to spread the troublemakers out so there wouldn't be more than one in any cabin. The only group that had more than one troublemaker was Mr. Nuzzy's group. But Mr. Nuzzy works as a prison guard, so I guess they figured he could handle it. Since I registered late, I got put with a group of leftovers, which included Rowley. I was glad I got assigned to the same cabin as Rowley, but I wasn't happy his father was the chaperone. Mr. Jefferson has never really been a big fan of mine, and I wasn't looking forward to being cooped up with him for a whole week. When we opened the door, it was pretty clear whoever had our cabin last didn't bother cleaning up after themselves. One kid in my group, Julian Trimble, seemed to be taking the whole situation pretty hard, because his lip started to quiver as soon as he walked in the door. I was kind of surprised Julian decided to come on this trip, because I'm guessing he's never been away from his parents overnight before. Julian was always the kid who made a big scene every morning during drop-off time at school. Once, in second grade, He had such a strong grip on his mom that the vice principal had to come down to peel them apart. I figured Julian decided to go on this trip on his own, but when I remembered the way his mom raced out of the school parking lot this morning the moment Julian got out of the car, I started to wonder if his mom actually tricked him into it. Everybody started picking out their bunks, and that's when I found out why everyone had such big bags. They all pulled out blankets and sleeping bags. I had just assumed the bedding would be taken care of, but I guess that was too much to hope for at a place like this. The closest thing I had to a pillow was my hoodie, which already smelled like Roderick's ham sandwich. It was hard finding a mattress without any weird stains on it. I picked a top bunk because I couldn't risk being beneath Julian in case he wet the bed. Unfortunately, Mr. Jefferson slid into the spot right underneath me, so now Rowley's dad was my bunkmate. After we finished unpacking our stuff, we went down to the activities area to do some team-building exercises. The first thing we did was a trust fall, where one guy would fall backward and everyone else was supposed to catch him. I guess the point was to show how our teammates have our backs. But Jordan Lanky did his fall while the rest of us were still working out where to stand. One down. Mr. Jefferson showed us how to form two lines facing each other, and then make a net by grabbing each other's wrists. So when Jeffrey Swanson got up on the platform, we thought we were ready for him. But Jeffrey is a big boy, and his weight made Rowley and Gareth Grimes collapse and smash into each other. Bonk. 3 more down. Gareth was missing one of his front teeth, and everyone got down on their hands and knees to look for it. Then Emilio Mendoza found the tooth in Rowley's forehead. Mr. Jefferson told Emilio to run down and get the nurse, who brought Gareth a damp washcloth to stop the bleeding. But she couldn't pull the tooth out of Rowley's forehead because it was really lodged in there. Mr. Jefferson called his wife to come pick Rowley up and take him to get it checked out. I don't know if she ended up going to a doctor or a dentist, because I have no idea what you even do for that sort of thing. So Mr. Jefferson was stuck chaperoning a bunch of kids who weren't his. He had us do all these exercises that were supposed to teach us how to work together as a team, but all they really did was show us how bad we were at it. We did one activity called the Bucket Brigade, where we had to make a relay line to bring water from the river all the way to our cabin. The first guy filled up his bucket and then poured it in the next guy's bucket, and so on. But we spilled so much water along the way that by the time we got to the cabin, there was almost nothing left to put in the metal tub we were supposed to fill. We realized if we were ever going to finish the activity, we needed to find a better way to fill the tub. So we wrung out our sweaty clothes into it. After that, we did an activity where we had to tie our wrists together with scarves and go through an obstacle course made of ropes. But when it came to physical activities, our group was pretty hopeless. We ended up completely tied in knots. After the ropes course, we couldn't untie the scarves because we'd knotted them too tight. And that wasn't good because Jeffrey needed to use the bathroom in the cabin, and we were all still tied together. By the end of the day, everyone was totally worn out, and I was really glad when Mr. Jefferson told us it was time for dinner. The meal was chicken patties, corn on the cob, and stew. I passed on the stew, and I was really glad I did when I saw Jordan pull an entire taco shell out of his bowl. Who knows what year that thing was from? After dinner, we went back to the cabin. Mr. Jefferson said that since we had been in the woods, we needed to check one another for ticks. Each person was responsible for his bunkmate, which meant I had Mr. Jefferson. But Mr. Jefferson's got a lot of hair, and I wasn't going to go poking through it. For all I knew, there could be a whole colony of ticks living in there. Everybody's always saying how great the outdoors are, but there's all sorts of creepy crawlies you need to worry about. I used to play in the woods all the time until I swallowed a live spider. But in a place like Hardscrabble Farms, there are just as many bugs inside as outside. Some sort of beetle burrowed into a kid's ear at dinner, and he had to go to the nurse's station to have it removed. Jordan found a tick on the back of Julian's neck, and everybody freaked out about it. But Mr. Jefferson said Julian would be fine, and he took him down to the nurse. The second Mr. Jefferson and Julian left, the rest of the guys in my cabin went totally nuts. I stayed out of everybody's way because I didn't want to be the fifth person from my group to get seen by the nurse on the first day. By the time Mr. Jefferson got back, the cabin was a wreck and everyone was filthy. I'm guessing nobody has ever cleaned the floors in this place because when the guys were done rolling around, they were covered in dirt and hair. As a punishment for trashing the cabin, Mr. Jefferson made us go to bed early. And he lumped me in with everyone else, even though I didn't do anything. And that's how we ended up going to bed while it was still light out on the first night. Tuesday. Mr. Jefferson woke everybody up at the crack of dawn and said we all needed to take showers before breakfast. That's when it occurred to me that there wasn't actually a shower in our bathroom. The shower was on the outside of the cabin, and the water was in the metal tub we filled up in the bucket brigade yesterday. I seemed to be the only one who remembered what was in that tub, because everyone else got in line to take their turn. Not only was the water unsanitary, but apparently it was cold, too, judging by the shrieks of my cabin mates. I came prepared, though. I definitely wasn't going to be taking any outdoor showers on this trip, but I could still keep myself clean by using my stash of freshies. Breakfast wasn't a whole lot better than our first two meals, but at least they weren't serving the stew. The pancakes were hard as rocks, though, and they'd break your teeth if you tried to bite through one. Emilio snuck a pancake into his pocket so he could mail it home to his mom and show her how bad the food was at camp. After we cleaned up from breakfast, Mrs. Graziano told us the plan for the day. She said we were going to do the same types of chores done by kids growing up on farms like this a long time ago. Mrs. Graziano said that in the old days, kids worked from the time they got up in the morning until the sun went down, and they had to start working as soon as they were old enough to help their families out. Which is just another reason I'm glad I wasn't alive back then. My group started off in the barn, and our job was to move bales of hay from one end of the building to the other. It was seriously hard, and I have a lot of respect for kids who had to do that kind of work every day. When we were finished, everybody felt a huge sense of accomplishment. As we were leaving to move on to the next station, Mr. Nuzzy's group came into the barn. He told his team their job was to move the hay bales to the other side, which was where they were to begin with. So don't even ask me why we went to all that trouble. See, you shouldn't do that kind of stuff to a kid. When I was in first grade, my teacher told me she was sending me on a secret mission, and she gave me a note to deliver to another teacher down the hall. And every day after that, my teacher handed me another note to deliver. Well, one day I got curious about what was in those notes,